2 o'clock? Must be time to go. Can't wait, right? Yeah. All right, folks. Well, my name is Chris Swires, and I'm one of the owners and operator of CD's Trees, located in Logie Bay, right on Marine Drive, so you can't miss us. We're on the main drag, right? So I take this time as a promotional minute and give you all an opportunity to understand where we are so you can come visit next spring. Anyway, we'll get down to business. At the nursery, you know, we do it because it's fun and because we enjoy doing the gardening piece, and there's a lot of things about it that we like, and you know, so we don't want it to become work. And for that reason, then, and because I get a lot of questions, you know, throughout the days when I am at the nursery, everybody comes with a question, and I said, well, you know, for today, what I would do is just maybe answer some of the questions that people have posed in the past, and maybe give you some tips about things that we've recommended in the past and other people have done successfully. So for that reason, I'll just park a few items out there, and if you have any questions later on, then feel free to ask, right? I'll also give you a couple of hints about the plants here, right? So one of the things, like, we get a lot of new housing owners, and they come and they have a clean slate, you know. And so when you're coming, thank you. When you're coming with that on your slate, you have no idea, you know, what kind of plants to put where and all this kind of stuff. And it's very important that from a maintenance perspective, if nothing else, that you plant the right plant in the right place. And so we help a lot of folks try to get their plants, understand where they need to go and what you're going to have to do with them and how you're going to get them to grow successfully and get them to grow well, right? So we oftentimes will recommend, you know, instead of a single shrub planting, we might recommend a shrub bed in a place where a number of plants can go together and work well. And we oftentimes will combine that with, say, shrubs or trees or annuals or perennials, and that could be a lot of different combinations, right? And it basically evolves around things that you like, right? So what I try to do then is okay, understand what you like, and then understand what will work in the spaces that you have, right? So, you know, we've done things like, for instance, in a new house, for instance, I always recommend that folks don't plant right up tight to the house. We always like to leave a 12 or an 18-inch border where you can use a stone mulch or something like that to give you access to the backside of your shrub bed that you build. And it also gives you access to the house if you need to do some work on your house, you know. So it's just a little thing, but it's very helpful sometimes. That little 1 foot or 1.5 foot space, you don't even see it from the street. So, you know, when you're looking at your view from the sidewalk, it doesn't make a difference, but it does make a difference when you have to work on the plants, or because all the plants are going to require maintenance. Doesn't matter, you know, I get a lot of people come and they say, I want a very low maintenance plant. Well, a low maintenance plant, yeah, there are low maintenance plants, but there are no maintenance plants. Everyone is going to require a little bit, right? And some a little bit more than others. So understanding, you know, what level you are and how well you know the plants might have some bearing on the plant that you choose, right? Because some are going to require a little bit less maintenance than others, right? Some require a bit more know-how. So, you know, until you learn all that stuff, then you want to keep it as simple as you can so it makes it easier. If you make it difficult right from the very start, then it's going to be work. And once it becomes work, it's no longer fun. And if it's no longer fun, we don't want to do it, right? We want to enjoy what we're doing because gardening is good for you physically, good for you mentally, gives you time to, be by yourself and think a little bit, and it just settles you down a little bit. So it's a nice, relaxing piece of work to do, but you don't want it to be stressful, right? And so also, in that same breath, we'll say, when you are selecting plants and building shrub beds and areas with different green plants and whatever, then would suggest that you try to do it without increasing the workload too much, too fast. Because a lot of people go out and they build a huge big landscape all around their house, but now they have no time or no ability to keep it looking like it should. It's a lot of work, right? So because it is, we suggest that you go slower, right? Yeah. One of the other things I guess one of the bigger things that we get a lot of questions, I certainly get a lot of questions about fruit trees, right? Fruit trees and why do I get no fruit, and how come I only got little small apple or whatever, right? So I'll just give you a few tidbits that I know about fruit trees, and some of them are about variety. There are varieties that grow in different areas, and some are better than others, right? If you look at all the different varieties that are out there, you will find not a huge selection for here. It's not bad, but there are very few that will grow well here and produce well, right? Which is what we're hoping to do. If we're growing an apple tree, for instance, then we want it to produce fruit. So in order to get that, some of the things that I look at when I choose an apple tree for us to sell in our nursery, I would look at very much the mature date for that apple tree. Some like Macintosh, for instance, is one that will grow here because it has a mature date that falls within the limits of our season. So, in other words, it's going to produce mature fruit before it gets too cold here to grow anymore, right? So we want to choose an apple tree that fits in that window of time that we have to grow it, right? And also, one of the other things that determines whether or not we get good fruit production is the amount of daylight hours that we get. So, you can look up our daylight hours here for our climate, wherever you are, and then you can compare that to how many hours it takes for that apple to grow, right? So it's just a couple of little things, but it's very helpful when you're choosing the fruit tree that you want to use, right? And so that's just one other little tidbit, I guess, that I know about fruit trees. The other thing about fruit trees is it evolves around, some of them are scab resistant, for instance, right? So you want to choose one that's going to have nice fruit as opposed to one. A lot of the older varieties are not necessarily scab resistant. So, we want to choose those that are going to perform well here in our climate without the scab, and you have a nice clean apple when you're done, right? Pruning is another thing that has a huge effect on how much fruit production you get. Oftentimes, if you don't prune, then what happens is the center of your tree will grow in with branches and leaves, and you don't get enough light coming down through the tree in order to allow the fruit to ripen properly. So what we do is, we have a rule of thumb, so your tree grows up, and then it should grow out. And if you have any branches that are crossing or growing in through the center, those would be the ones that I would prune first. And what that does then is open up the center of your tree so that it allows light to get down through and allows your fruit to mature a little better, right? The other thing that pruning does is a lot of times people just let the tree grow and they say, well, it flowers and it never get no fruit. Well, maybe it does flower, but a lot of times if you prune, that will promote more flowering. And so with more flowers, then you have a better chance of pollination. Just more is better. It always increases your chances of better fruit production, right? So pruning will allow, when you prune, basically you're removing a branch, and for pretty much every tree out there, for every leaf, there is a root, right? So if you cut a branch, there's a root down there doing nothing, and it wants to do something. So now it's telling the tree, hey, I got all this energy, I'm going to push that back up, and we're going to make this work, right? And when it does that, it does that in the form of more growth on your branches, more flowering, more leaves, all of the above, right? So it just pushes that energy out to wherever it can get it, and because of that, then you've introduced a factor that will promote more flowering and fruit production. So that's another little bit, and that works basically with many of the fruit trees, you know, cherry trees or plum trees or any of those trees. They're all going to basically, from a basic perspective, always going to work the same, right? So a lot of these things apply not just to apple trees, but many others, right? And then there's other things, I guess, not only fruit trees, but pretty much all of the plants, right? I get a lot of questions. For instance, how come this leaf is yellow? You know, and there are so many things that can affect how a plant works and how the leaves work. You need to consider many things when you look at this. This could be a soil deficiency that says my plant doesn't have enough iron, or it could be just the wind dried out my leaf, right? It could be easy or it could be difficult, but don't look for the difficult things first. Look for the easy things first. Did you water the plant? If you didn't water it, that could cause your leaves to dry out, right? Did we have rain? If we didn't have rain, that also could cause a problem, right? So I'm suggesting that we look at basically the easy things first, and especially if we're in that troubleshooting mode to try and understand, you know, what's going on with my plant here, right? And so there could be many things, right? This plant here, for instance, has some yellow leaves, but it's fall and it's supposed to, right? So I always, when someone asks me a question about plant health or anything like that, the first thing I have to do is return a question to say, okay, what environment is your plant in? So I need to know a little bit about where it's planted and what's going on in that area, right? So that's kind of how I look at some of that plant maintenance, right? I'll spend the last little bit of time I have just using this guy here as an example, and I brought these because they were good examples of what I need to do, right? So they're hydrangeas. Typically, they're a fall blooming plant. This one in particular is called PG, and it can grow probably about 3 meters or 10, 12 feet, and it can have profuse blooming, you know, depending on the conditions that it grows under, right? So if it gets the right amount of fertilizers and water and all the things that it needs, is going to perform well, right? But even when it does perform well, then, you know, there's still things that happen within the plant that might need a little help with. Nature doesn't always look after it. So in this case, for instance, here we've had a little bit of dieback. What I would do is let's get rid of that right away, right? And to do that, just prune, right? And take it back to the last good branch, right? So, you know, I've got a number of these little branches here that I can just snip away and take those. And if it's got a leaf, oops, sorry, you know, it's not so bad. But I'll start with the understory first and clip any dieback there. In the fall, with a hydrangea, lots of times we like to use the dried flowers, right? So in this case, I would take this guy, take him right back to a node where I have two more leaves coming out of here, and when I snip it right here, we've got a nice dried flower or a plant to dry for my house, and I also have 3 nodes right here. So next year, what's going to happen is where I have branching here, or leaves coming out, I'm going to see branches come out of there next year, right? And that's going to promote this plant to fill out a little better. So I'll get more branching and more blooming, hopefully. In particular, PG blooms on the new wood, not the old wood. So that's another reason for pruning this plant, is to promote more new growth on that plant, and that then more new growth is going to bring me more blooms next year, right? So not every hydrangea is like that. I have in our nursery now somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 different varieties, and they are a lot of them are different, each one, right? Some are continuous blooming, and some will bloom on old and new wood. Some need to be pruned hard, some not so hard, you know. So there's many different types of hydrangeas, and I would suggest that the best way is to understand which one you have and then, you know, tackle it, right? And if you're not sure, it's a question, that's all, you know. It's a phone call or an email or drop by, and, you know, lots of times we can figure out what it is, right, if you don't know. So I've done that many times. In worst case, bring me a branch, you know, and I can oftentimes identify from that. So it's not that difficult to do, and I'd suggest that if your plant is performing poorly, then, you know, maybe pruning will help, right? There's a lot of other factors that, as I mentioned with the apple trees and the fruit trees, you know, this guy here, he's no different, right? He needs proper amount of food and water in order to survive, same as we do. So if you use that philosophy, you know, what am I missing? It could be the same thing, right? So we look at it a little bit that way, right? Rhododendrons. This guy here is a big leaf rhododendron. It's an evergreen, and it stays that way year round, and hopefully doesn't turn yellow, but if it does, lots of times they like to have a little bit of extra iron. Iron deficiencies is not uncommon with this plant, and in most cases our soil has enough iron, but if it's say a mixed soil that you used to build the space where you plant this shrub, then you may or may not have iron, right? Depends on what they use to mix the soil. So if we do have an iron deficiency, chances are you're going to see a yellow leaf or something like that on those. And they tend to droop a little as well. So, you know, it's kind of the same thing, you know, when you remember, I don't know if some people here are perhaps old enough to remember the Geritol commercial where you have iron poor blood. I'm old enough, and you are too, I see. So it's no different, right? When the plant is tired and worn out, then it tends to fade and droop a little, right? No different. So I kind of look at that stuff the same. You know, I make a lot of comparisons between the plant and myself, so it's a lot of fun. The other thing I want to tell you about rhododendron, and you can't see it very well from down there, but when the plant flowers, there's a few leftovers here. And typically what we want to do is, this basically houses the seed that the flower produced. And what we want to do is just kind of snap that guy off, because we don't want this little bit hanging around. We don't want the rhododendron to spend time making seeds work well when the goal is to have flowers, right? And the other thing that does is, if you want to drop by and look at this afterwards, feel free. It's because I know it's difficult to see, but around that area where that flower left the seed, there are a number of buds, and if we don't take that seed off, in other words, if we don't deadhead, is what we call it technically, but if we don't do that, then you're going to have some issues where these buds won't continue to grow out and provide more branching. They will stay as buds and not grow out. So what happens then is this branch that already has an end on it now, that keeps growing, right? So we haven't pruned to promote branching. And when that happens, then what you'll find is the understory in your rhododendron gets pretty woody and gray, and there's not much life down there, right? So what we want to do is start deadheading the flowers once they've finished and they've faded. Then we can take those flowers, snap the seed pods off of them, and that will promote the buds to start growing, and it'll help keep the gray understory from getting so big where it's unattractive anymore. So that pretty much sums up what I had to say for today, but I am willing to take any questions for a few minutes. I think we do have another few minutes. I got my 20 minutes up, so. So anybody who has a question, I'd be happy to field it if you want. The best time to prune an apple tree. I'd be inclined to do it in the fall, because if I